120 years after their invention, the railways were in a sorry state, made much worse by the overuse and underinvestment of 2 world wars. In 1948, this became our problem. The Labour government nationalised the railways. They were now owned by all of us. This was bad news for the taxpayer, because by 1955, British Railways was firmly in the red. The British Transport Commission, which resided here in London, was responsible for fixing this economic disaster. This palatial building, erected by one of the great Victorian railway companies, now hosted discussions to salvage a network in decline. The British Transport Commission came up with a scheme. It would transform the railways from an old-fashioned, run-down network into a sleek, contemporary, efficient industry. The estimated price tag for this was over £1 billion, the equivalent of 22 billion in today's money. But the Commission was convinced that this investment would revive the fortunes of the railway. And this modernisation plan was called the Modernisation Plan.
A new word has come into railways, and with it a lot of exciting changes. The word is modernisation.
The modernisation plan was really the great lost opportunity before Beeching, because the railways did at last get all the money they had been clamouring for years and years and years. And if they had spent it more wisely, then maybe we might not have had Beeching.
British Railways began to phase out steam engines, but they exchanged them for hastily commissioned diesels. These fast developed a reputation for breaking down. And in an attempt to take on the lorry, 30 huge marshalling yards were built, so freight wagons could be moved more easily. The only thing missing was the freight. The railway industry was unable to compete, either with the prices or with the logistical convenience that the road hauliers could offer. The British Transport Commission's idea that freight would return to pre-war levels was simply unrealistic. In fact, it was almost inevitable that the modernisation plan would fail to pull British Railways out of the red, because the money the government had put up was not a grant or a subsidy, it was a loan to be paid back with interest. By the start of the 1960s, British Railways' deficit was £112 million. And it was out of control. Something would have to be done. Harold Macmillan isn't generally seen as a radical Prime Minister, but he took a hard line on the railways. They were to run like a business and aim to pay their own way. Put in charge of making this happen was Transport Minister Ernest Marples. Marples, however, was pro-road. In fact, he'd amassed a fortune building roads before entering politics. There, he became one of the most controversial ministers of the post-war era.
I don't think Ernest Marples would have survived 5 minutes in politics today, because he really seemed to take almost perverse delight in upsetting people and in flirting with scandal. Macmillan had a very high opinion of Marples, almost as high as Marples' opinion of himself. Macmillan could see that Marples would be the right sort of person to pursue a difficult and potentially very unpopular policy towards the railways.
Marples relished the task of taking the railways in hand. There was to be no place for the nooks and crannies of the network so beloved by the Betchmans of this world. Marples brought in the like-minded Dr. Beeching to facilitate his unsentimental plan for the railway's future. The bottom line would be the bottom line.
Isn't there something to be said for the railways being run as a service to the nation rather than on the strict profit and loss basis of a private company?
There is something to be said, but I think it's a doubtful argument. Somebody's got to pay, and if a service of this kind is not supported by those who use it, then it means a tax on the populace in general.
The 17th of April 1961 might have seemed like a normal Monday to passengers and railway staff around the country. In fact, it was day one of a 7-day survey into line traffic on which Beeching would base his report.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go.
The results starkly exposed the inefficiency of the railways.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
The key thing that Beeching did establish was that about 95% of rail traffic travelled on half the network, and the other half of the network just wasn't carrying enough to be viable. That was the important statistic.
Beeching now felt he had the evidence to justify the policy that he and Marples had intended to implement from the start. Mass closure. There's nothing modern about hiring a spin doctor. Beeching needed to manage the bad news. And he hired John Nunnally, who'd been director of publicity for the Express newspaper group. Now at British Transport HQ, he had to stop the papers getting wind of the closures.
The press itself had been pretty hostile, hadn't it?
Yes. Newspapers really wanted to get advance information.
I bet.
Because they wanted to run stories which would warn the general public their station could be axed and all the rest of it.
And were there no leaks?
No. I decided that I would hire something like 25 absolutely first-rate typists from the private sector, not from within the railways.
Right.
Every night I personally destroyed every typewriter ribbon that had been used.
Right, in case it had a name left on it.
Exactly.
The long-awaited report was finally made public in March 1963. This is it. This is the Beeching Report. Official title, The Reshaping of British Railways, an early example of euphemistic management speak. The reduction of British Railways would have been accurate, or the rescuing of British Railways, if you wanted to be optimistic. But the reshaping, it was. Came in two parts. Part one, the report, which was tables, charts, arguments. Part two, a series of detailed maps, all to show that Beeching had done his homework. But the section that most people turned to was Appendix 2 in the end of Part 1, which was a list of passenger services, line and station closures. And it has been said that this list reads like the list of names on a war memorial. Abbey Town, Acrow Halt, Acton Central, Addingham, Addlestrop, Ainsdale, Henford Halt, Henfield, Hensall, Henstridge, Henwick, Stratton Park Hall, Hesketh Streatley, Strine, Stubbins, Southtown, Yates, Suckley, Yelversoft and Stanford Park, Yeoford, Yeomill Halt, Yeovil Pen Mill, Yeovil Town, Yetminster, Yorton. There was a sense that a great portion of Britain had been given a sort of death sentence, and it was a PR disaster.
Beeching just wasn't the sort of political animal who would see how that list would, in a way, become a testament to what a terrible person he was. The Guardian published a poem called Lament, which ended, "We shall stop at you no more because Dr. Beeching stops at nothing."
Millersdale for Tideswell.
It gave a romantic quality to all these lost destinations, which was immediately exploited by people like Flanders and Swan.
No more will I go to Blandford Forum and Morty Ho.